Hello, welcome to the Mental Health School Prognosis presentation. Today's presentation will serve as a quick overview of mental health definitions, a refresh on our recent training, and our campus systems, as well as district resources and the expected duties as a mandated reporter on our campus. So before we begin, we're going to look at some broad definitions. Most of us are already familiarized with mental health definitions. However, it's important for us to continue to contextualize and learn about changes if there is any. Now, mental disorder is characterized by a disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior according to the World Health Organization. If we look at more common disorders that are often seen among adolescents and probably more commonly found in our classrooms, we're going to look at anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. So, anxiety can manifest in two different ways. Sometimes you see it in a very outward way, other times it is what we would say is a little more inward. And so it's defined according to the American Psychological Association as apprehension and somatic symptoms of tension in which an individual anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. We will look at some of the symptoms and what you may be able to identify in your classroom after this slide. For depression, this is usually a more negative disposition. It is commonly seen with a range of unhappiness, discontent, an extreme feeling of sadness, pessimism, and despondency that interferes with daily life. Okay, so the daily life is key in depression. For eating disorders, we're going to just look at the three most common types of eating disorders. Most of us are familiarized with anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating. So let's look to see what that may look like in your classroom. So again, anxiety can be manifested in two different ways. When we look at our physical symptoms, this might be a student that is very tense. You see them, what we would deem as an anxiety attack, where they're respirating fast, heart rate has increased. You can tell that there's a very obvious discomfort with the student. The student may get up, ask to go to the nurse, ask to get some type of support. Okay. The other way that it may manifest is that you actually may see the student not show it outwardly. This student may actually sit quietly in your class and you may not even notice a big difference. However, students with this type of anxiety may be less engaged. And then it will also show in other ways. Just like as adults, all of us deal with anxiety or moments of stress differently. So you just have to be aware of that and recognize that every individual is different. And so it may look differently to every student. Now, I also want to point out that you're not going to ever go up to a student and ask a student, hey, are you having an anxiety attack? Or hey, are you depressed? Right? That is not the goal of the teacher. And in fact, that is not appropriate according to your duties as a teacher. Now, if a student is in distress and they volunteer, lend that information to you, that's where, as the mandated reporter or as the faculty or staff um, on duty, that's when you're going to make that professional decision to support that student. Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit more in just a second. Depression is, of course, associated with more of somebody that's withdrawn, more of a negative disposition, somebody that's not as motivated. With students, you'll see that maybe a student that was previously very engaging, somebody that was very social with their friends and their peers, may start to become more withdrawn, and it's kind of difficult to get a read with them. As far as eating disorders with students, this is probably one that's a little more difficult. So, um, the biggest thing here is that if you see something, just like we often say, then say something. Um, but you cannot go to a child and say, "Oh, are you depressed?" or "Do you have anxiety?" Right? If the student lends that information or volunteers it, then you have to go through the appropriate protocols to get to get the student the support that they need. Okay, so we're going to look at some trends just at a kind of global and national level. Um, we have seen this trend where social media and digital accessibility has risen, right? Since the advent of these things, a lot of researchers have found correlations that show that students are a little more challenged because of this, right? For example, if people are or if a student is seeing somebody on TikTok, they might compare themselves to that, and this lends to other issues like body dysmorphia, um, and it's harder for students to see themselves in a more positive way, especially in social settings. It also creates an easier space for cyberbullying. Um, and we can look at one of the facts here. It says teens identified in a Pew Research survey that teens have deemed anxiety and depression and bullying as the most significant problems among them and their peers. Also think about this in the context of the classroom. 61% of teens um, feel pressured to get good grades. So also think about that, right? How do we talk to students about their performance in class? If we have a negative disposition, if we're coming down on students in a certain way, it does not create a positive environment. It's not positive reinforcement or encouragement for that student. So we always want to create the most positive space for student well-being. So think about that as you structure your classroom. We also know that in LGBTQ students and females that they tend to have the highest correlation in outward behaviors. In other words, they tend to be more depressed, they have higher anxiety, and suicidal ideation and follow-through of suicidal ideation is the highest among females and LGBTQ youth. So just kind of keep those things in perspective. I want to point out that the state requires that every every campus or district has some type of framework or curriculum where the adults are trained in mental health and suicide prevention. Most of us in Fort Dodge ISD are familiar with safe school trainings. This training exists for many other districts, and many of us might say, "Oh, I don't want to do that. This is boring." But I will tell you that it's important that you do it every year. The difference of you taking it seriously could be the difference of saving a student. Um, I personally have had students that I had to be the mandated reporter because of suicidal ideation or depression or anxiety or whatever significant issue may be going on at home. So it's important that we do that. This is also adjacent to Title IX compliance. So we want to ensure that everybody is doing it. At our current campus, there's a 100% completion rate. So we can be excited about that. But we need to continue to have conversations to ensure that everybody's up to date. Um, I kind of want to look at some collaborative responses here. In other words, how are all the partners or stakeholders coming into play, right? So we expect teachers to do their due diligence, but the district also has um, a professional duty or really a state requirement to ensure that their faculty are being appropriately trained. And you also have accessible resources for students and their families. And so I'm about to show you a slide about what Fort ISD currently has for families and students. And we also have the expectation that parents are going to work with their school to tell us what their needs are. Now, that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes parents don't know that they need help, or parents don't know how to ask for help. So most campuses have an interventionist, or they have a FES, family engagement specialist. So it's important that our campus really tries to reach out and let parents know the type of things that we have, how we can be supportive, how we can be collaborative as a team, and how we're supporting them and their family. Okay. So this is our district resource page. The Family and Community Resources page has several sources. I kind of just combed through it and looked at the three most significant pages. So we do have district service centers. Each service center kind of serves as a post where if a family needs services, they can go to it. So we currently have five, and they're spread around Fort Worth and our district. And so information's there, and any parent can access that. We also have a partnership with Here for Texas, which is directly related to mental health, and these offer additional services. And many of these services include free counseling for students and their families. Um, I also want to share what our systematic response is for teachers that are going through this presentation. It's always good to review what our current processes are at the moment, and maybe even we can adjust going forward. So the expectation is teachers will continue to monitor student behaviors, document and refer as needed, um, work to really use your PLCs. Ideally, PLC should be instructional, but you should also have grade level or grade level team PLCs that looks at data outside of some of the instructional components. So, in other words, give your grade level team time to discuss when appropriate certain students. For example, um, I had a student that teachers had indicated the student had aggressive behaviors in class. And so this kind of goes forward into grade level team and high school success team. This is where grade level team leads and the high school success team can look at student data, see where student is, kind of look at the student holistically and try to get documentation and data from multiple teachers and multiple sources so that we can kind of figure out a plan for that student. Students that need more support is when you want to ensure that you're letting administration know what's going on. The counseling team is in this third bubble, but really counseling should be in the loop the entire time. I also included our campus at a glance and some demographics. This is from our TEA, one of our scorecards. Um, our demographics pretty much stay the same, but I include this because I want teachers to think about what students are you serving, right? Last year I presented to the group an aggregation of student zip codes. And the reason I did that is because our school is not really a neighborhood school, if you want to call it that, right? A vast majority of students don't really live near our campus. In other words, they're very spread out. We have students that live as far as 30 miles away from our campus. And so it's important to understand who you're serving and also what deficits exist if there are. I also included these two pie charts just to let teachers know that there has been a report pool. This is a recent pool to show that teachers are not documenting as well as they should be, right? If only 65 to 70% of behaviors are logged, it's difficult to kind of holistically look at a student as one person or two people on a team when the rest of the teachers aren't really doing that. I also want to point out that in accordance to state law, we do have to have consent on file for counseling services. Our campus, based on the latest report I have, only 74% of our students have actually turned in a document saying yes, they consent to counseling services. So if a student is not in that 25%, we only actually had 8 students that said no, or parents said no. The other 22%, if you want to look at it that way, have not even submitted the paper. So if that student were to have an issue, um, we cannot render services to them because according to the state, we don't have permission to do so. So make sure if those students are in your homeroom that you're getting the appropriate documentation for them. I also want to just reiterate that we're going to continue with our plan to recognize and support students that need help, especially if they're exhibiting any of the disorders or symptoms that we've discussed today. Teachers will continue to document in branching minds, which is our common RTI system, right? And then faculty and staff will continue to acknowledge the importance and necessary learning to carry out their duties in regards to student well-being. I included some final, a little bit of time if you had any questions. There's also a quick survey that you can answer so that we can get a better idea of where you're at in regards to mental health on our campus. Thank you. If you don't have any more questions, that's it for today. Email me if you have more.